Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Wooten. I'm the president of the Atlanta Press Club. Thank you for joining us today for our online newsmaker event as we welcome several special guests to discuss the new documentary film, Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President. We'd like to remind you that if you have any questions for our speakers or our moderator today, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. We have a lot of great material to cover today, so we may run a few minutes long, but that is the beauty of online events. No parking fees or validated parking tickets for you today. Thank you for supporting the work of the Atlanta Press Club, just simply by joining this webinar, but also visit atlantapressclub.org for our upcoming events, to sponsor an event, to join as a member, or to donate to the club. Journalism has never been more important than it is right now. All right, let's get started. We're a few weeks from President Carter's 96th birthday, so it's wonderful to be able to share this discussion about the film Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President. It shows how Carter's lifelong passion for music gave him an unexpected edge as a presidential candidate, as he tapped into a force that transcends racial and generational divides and often party lines. Carter's appreciation for all genres of music and his friendships with the likes of Bob Dylan, Greg Allman, Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash, and Willie Nelson helped to define his administration, and they are a huge part of the film. We're excited right now to share the extended trailer of the film with you before we start the discussion.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine.
All right.
Last song for me.
Sounds familiar. One of the things that have held America together has been the music that we share and love.
Jimmy Carter used music in a way that helped him in his politics. It had never been done quite that way.
I'd like to dedicate this song to Jimmy Carter.
I want to introduce to you the great Allman Brothers.
He was cool, he enjoyed our music, and he became a friend.
When I first met Jimmy, first thing he did was quote my songs back to me.
Bob Dylan has been one of my best friends, along with Willie Nelson. When Willie Nelson wrote his autobiography, he confessed that he smoked pot in the White House. And he says that his companion was one of the servants in the White House. Actually, was one of my sons.
My thoughts and my prayers for our hostages in Iran are as though they were my own sons and daughters.
The hostage thing, I think, amplified a lot of the fears that people had.
With all the odds against him, he still did what he thought was right. That's not a bad pattern for all of us to follow.
Human rights, the right to live like a human, that's something that President Carter tried to make real with his foreign policy.
We now had a president that started to see the world the way we saw it.
His love for music makes sense to me because music is the voice of the heart.
One of the reasons that musicians were drawn to President Carter, he was a man of the earth. For God's sake, he was a peanut farmer.
That was the music of change and dissidence. There was a risk politically for that, and it didn't matter to him.
I think music is the best proof that people have one thing in common, no matter where they live, no matter what language they speak.
Fantastic trailer, love that. Today we've asked Melissa Ruggieri from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to moderate our program. This month, Melissa is celebrating 10 years writing about music and entertainment at the AJC. In 2012, she created the Atlanta Music Scene blog and has regularly been on the front lines and red carpets at the Grammy Awards, CMA Awards, and even Super Bowls, as well as hundreds of concerts every year. Something you may not know about her: she has seen Billy Joel live 60 times, and she remembers when MTV was awesome, as do I. Melissa is a regular contributor to the AJC's Access Atlanta podcast, as well as co-host of Cox Media's Two Girls Talking. So welcome, Melissa.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. And thank you also for giving me a reason to put on lipstick for literally the first time since March, I think. So today actually is my 10th anniversary at the AJC, and I can't think of a better way to commemorate it than being able to talk about this amazing documentary that has such great roots right here in Georgia. For those of you who don't know, the seeds were actually planted from Peter Conlon, who's the president of Live Nation Atlanta, because he was the national fundraising director for President Carter back in the 70s. And Chris and Mary will tell us a little bit more about how it evolved from that point. But want to let you know that Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, is going to be in theaters nationwide starting tomorrow. Right here, it will be at the Landmark Theater in Atlanta. And then on October 9th, it goes to video on demand. And on January 3rd, will be aired on CNN, which they say is like the day to have your product shown on CNN right after the new year. So you could check it out in any of those places. And now we're going to introduce our panelists. We are so pleased to have Mary Wharton and Chris Farrell with us today. Mary is a fellow music lover like us and is the director of Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, along with many other documentaries and television specials about music. Chris, who is joining us via phone, is the producer of the film. So welcome to both of you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Melissa. Nice to talk to you again.
You too, you too. Now, to start us off, Mary, take us back to the beginning of this project. I know because you and I and Chris had spoken before, so I know how Chris came to you because he'd been wanting to work with you about on something. But when you heard about it, had you been a fan of President Carter's prior to that? Had you known about his involvement with musicians? What did you bring in when you first got involved with this?
Well, I was really shocked when I first heard about President Carter's association and long, and deep love affair with music, because I didn't know that about him. I grew up in North Florida, just about 30 miles from the Georgia border in Tallahassee, Florida, and or outside of there. And so, growing up and I was a kid when Carter was president, but I always looked up to him and I admired him. And I think that he gave a lot of people in the South something to feel really proud about, our Southern roots, that, a Southerner was the president of the United States. And I remember I would always see his mother, Lillian, on The Tonight Show and other, TV programs. And she reminded me a lot of my Southern grandmother. And I don't know, it just felt like he was like my people. It was just sort of really interesting. And so when I learned that he had this music connection, I immediately was so excited to look into that, because I didn't know at all, and I was so surprised. So I figured that if I didn't know, and I find, I think I'm pretty well versed in music history, American music history in particular, and popular music history. And I thought there must be a lot of other people out there that also didn't realize this connection. So.
Well, were you the only woman who was part of this, aside from Roseanne Cash and Trisha Yearwood and
No,
Roger's girlfriend?
We had a lot of badass ladies on our team. The editor, Mari Kiko Gonzalez, is a total rock star editor. I had our sound mixer, who did an incredible job with all of the sound design and the mixing of all of these fantastic concerts that you hear in the film. Sue Polino mixed all of that. And I really made a real concerted effort to get as many female technical crew members as we could. We were somewhat limited with our budget being small, that we didn't have a budget to fly our technical crew around with us to wherever we went. And we were interviewing folks like Chuck Leavell in Atlanta, and folks like Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood in Nashville. And we were doing, picking up crews wherever we went. But we made a real effort, and I'm very proud of the fact that we had a lot of women on our crew, because it takes a little bit of extra effort sometimes, but I always find that it's really worth it because they work hard.
Yes, yes, we do. So this was a 2.5-year project, if I recall correctly. And tell us about, just setting up you had, like you say, you had so many people who you interviewed. You have Chuck, you had, Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon. What was it like going into their homes and into where you interviewed them to be able to sit down and talk about President Carter and music with them?
Well, everyone was so incredibly gracious, and either by opening up their homes or their office spaces or wherever to us, or coming to where we were. Oftentimes we would set up somewhere in a particular location so that we could have people like come one right after the other so that we could get more done in a single day, because of budgetary reasons. That was kind of a crucial element to this. And everyone, was just amazing in terms of giving of their time, helping us find materials, and just so willing to be a part of this in a way that I found really unusual, because typically when you're trying to get people to, these are very busy people. I know Chuck Leavell was squeezing us in between tour dates store and whoever else he had going on at the time, and to come and talk about something that essentially nobody had anything to gain from this other than just sort of having an opportunity to sort of praise their friend Jimmy Carter, and everyone did it out of that sincere sense of friendship, and I presume about kind of as a way to show their admiration for President Carter, which was really palpable all the time, and everyone was so wonderful.
Well, Chuck can tell us a little bit more about that later, about his involvement with it. Was there anyone that you wanted to get that you weren't able to wrangle?
We would have liked to have had more of the artists from the jazz concert, which is such an amazing part of the film, and we had such great footage. A lot of them sadly are no longer with us, and there were a few that are still alive that we were trying to work out, but timing and logistics, we had planned to go out to Los Angeles to try to interview a few people out there. There was a gentleman named Clarence Yvette who had been sort of a big record label, like sort of an impresario kind of guy back in the 60s and 70s, and he had helped the Carter campaign and wanted to be part of the film. And we never made it out to LA. We kind of ran out of money and ran out of time, as you do with documentaries,
Well, you got a lot accomplished though. Well, Chris, I'm going to throw this over to you. Through all of the old footage and all of the new footage, was there anything that surprised you that popped up with all of it? And I mean, I think a lot of people might have some familiarity with President Carter and the Allman Brothers or Willie Nelson and know that they had some history together, and Bob Dylan. I think some might be surprised to see Nile Rodgers in there. But what about you? What were you surprised by?
Well, I mean, even though you're right, people did have familiarity, and that Peter Connell in that first meeting, and Tom Beard, who also was in that meeting, they did a great job of sort of illuminating and bringing to life. I mean, to see though the archival footage and to realize that this wasn't sort of episodic. This wasn't like a 1 or 2 time thing. These were deep and ongoing relationships. So I mean, even though we had started the project and we sort of knew the broad canvas of what we were trying to paint, it's still, I have to tell you, every day, even that cast of characters we mentioned, but then as you got into jazz, you mentioned jazz. I mean, to me, that was the real reveal. I had no idea, of that deep appreciation and that deep knowledge. And And it's also probably one of the most powerful, at least in from my perspective, one of those powerful ports of the movie. When he gets up there, and he obviously knows jazz extremely well, but he addresses the nation in a way that really, really showed moral courage and really showed moral leadership by taking on racism and by acknowledging that was a fact of American life, previously, and was still with us at that time and today, sadly. But I think the jazz part was the big reveal for me.
Well, and what's also really interesting, I know you had the film premiered earlier this year, and then of course we've had everything going on with the pandemic these last few months, but now that it is finally being released, it does seem to have perfect timing in a lot of ways, in that it can certainly serve as a comfort to people, I think, when you see that relationship between music and politics even.
Well, again, as we talked about with you, last week, I think it was, this was a 3-year odyssey, journey, whatever you want to call it. And there were points in time where we thought, are we going to miss our window? Because this does seem so relevant as we're sitting here right now interviewing this person or in the edit room or whatever. And I have to say that, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I mean, it's just even more relevant today, those issues have become more pronounced in the last 6 to 12 to 18 months. So we absolutely believe that it is incredibly timely and relevant.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Chris. Well, we're going to see some photos of musicians that President Carter befriended over the years. And Mary, we're hoping that you can maybe speak to each one for a few seconds as we go through the slideshow and tell us what we're seeing.
Yeah, well, this is a behind the scenes shot from when we interviewed Paul Simon. And this is, again, he was so gracious to allow us to come into his office and take over his office for the better part of an afternoon. And it was such a thrill for me to, right behind him, there's this cabinet that is full of 15 Grammys and, just my Grammy cabinet over here, and all of the songwriter awards and everything else that he's won over the years. And then he had one that was really cute that was world's greatest dad or something like that, which I was right next to his Grammys, So, and that's Bill Flanagan interviewing him.
Who was the writer on this documentary, right?
Yeah,
yes. Okay.
Exactly. And Dolly, this scene, which we use a little bit of the film clip in the movie where she greets Carter, and I mean, there is electricity between President Carter and Jimmy Carter, where I think she even I don't know, there's just they clearly adored each other so much, and you can see it on their faces.
Dolly's a firecracker anyway.
She is. This was from, I want to say it was kind of in the backstage or behind the scenes kind of the concert where we show Carter on stage with Willie. It came from the presidential library, but they were just hanging out backstage. And I love the casualness of it, that it's just couple of dudes sitting on a couch,
And the thing with his relationship with Willie that's so cool is how it has remained over the years. You see the footage in the film when Willie performed at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony for him, singing Georgia on My Mind. And 2016, I think it was, at Chastain, Willie Nelson performed, and President Carter and Mrs. Carter showed up at the event and were ushered in, a few minutes after the show started and the lights had gone down, and sat in the front row. And I remember watching them probably more than Willie most of the concert, and they were singing along with every song. I mean, President Carter at one point he was the only one standing up at the front of the stage, because I guess Secret Service was probably there too. but it was just such a lovely thing to see how, after all these decades, it's a true friendship. It's not, and Chris, I think, actually mentioned this when we spoke a few weeks ago, how President Carter wasn't necessarily interested in name dropping. These were genuine relationships that he had with these people, and I think that picture really reflects that too.
Yeah, I mean, Willie, I asked him about like what do they talk about when they're together, and his answer was basically, we don't really have to talk about much, which I think says a lot. When you have a friend that you can sit there together and not talk and not be uncomfortable with that, that's a pretty good friend to have.
Yeah.
You know,
That's a real friend. Yeah. Well, Christy, I know you're excited about this one.
Yeah, I want Mary to speak to it first, but then I do have a comment since I was at that event that night.
well, yeah, I mean, this is just so great because it's, you know, it's Bono and Nile Rodgers and President Carter. Like, who would ever expect to see those three rock stars together, you know?
Yeah, and the night was really interesting too, because President Carter, to my knowledge, President Carter and Bono hadn't really interfaced that much, if at all, in person before, yet had so many things in common in terms of their work in international development and things like that, especially through Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, who was on the elders with President Carter and is also kind of a charity partnership with Bono too. So that was, yes, that was a very unusual sight to see the three of them together. And also one of my personal favorite moments because, you know, Chic was my first favorite band when I was young. So to see Nile Rodgers there with my, you know, Jimmy Carter from Georgia, who was president when I was young too. So, you know, and then Bono, you know, it was just a great moment and so unexpected. And I'm glad that the film highlights that. So I think we're going to stop sharing slides now, and then we're getting ready to move on and speak with Chuck Lavelle.
Well, thank you, Mary and Chris, for that. And we are going to move on to Mr. Lavelle. And if you guys, Mary and Chris, could hang around a little bit for the Q&A that we'll do with the audience in a few minutes. Chuck, one of George's favorite sons, artist, advocate. You know him from his work in the Allman Brothers Band and, of course, as the touring keyboardist and de facto musical director for the Rolling Stones. Always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Always great to talk to you. You have become a friend of President Mrs. Carter over the years. And before he passed, though, Greg Allman was quoted on the Conan O'Brien show as saying that he laughed when then Governor Carter said that he was going to run for president. And you knew him then. So what were your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, thanks for allowing me to be a part of this panel, and thanks for everyone tuning in. And let me just say that Mary and Chris just did a masterful job with this film. They were kind enough to actually come to my house so that my wife and I could view the entire thing a couple of months or 3 months back. And we were just blown away. So kudos to them. Yeah, you know, I talk about it in the film where when he was governor, he came down to the studio, Capricorn Studios. We were recording Dickie Betts' first solo record. And we thought, you know, he would be there for a photo op, just a little bit of time. But in fact, he stayed for a couple of hours. He just was really interested in what we were doing. He was interested in the state of the business of music and in the process of the recording. And that was impressive at the time. It really was. And it wasn't long after that he did indeed divulge that he wanted to run for president. And we were all shocked, you know, what, really, huh, what? But immediately we were behind the effort for him to do so because we just, look, the guy was just so lovable. He was a great governor. He was such a likable human being. You know, he was an intellectual, is an intellectual. I mean, he's a nuclear physicist, for heaven's sake, you know, amongst all the other talents that he has. And so he had asked the Allman Brothers if we would engage in doing some fundraising benefits, and of course we did. And this, I believe, was the first time that the law allowed where the federal government would match the funds that we could raise privately. And so I think it did help his campaign. And ever since he was in office and out of office, we've remained to be very, very good friends. And you know, let me just say this, I might be an example. My name recognition isn't as strong as Bob Dylan's or Bono or Dolly Parton, but the president has been a strong personal friend of mine all these years. And that's meant a lot to me on a personal level, of course.
And so what do you guys talk about?
Well, the president has hunted at our place, Charlene, and we have hunted together a few times. We talk about outdoor issues. We talk about environmental issues. What is amazing is to hear him talk about some of the, classified things that he of course, he's not going to divulge everything that should not be divulged, but he has talked about some certain political events that were just amazing to hear the inside story of, that it was a privilege to be part of those conversations. We talk about music. I've read a good many of the president's books, and I was very interested to know his love of classical music when he was in the Navy. He and his roommate used to listen a lot to classical music, and they would get different renditions of the same performances of different artists doing classical pieces, so they could kind of recognize the differences in techniques. And of course, he's a fan of all types of music, which is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I like I said, I think people get the connection with rock and roll and Southern rock, but the gospel, jazz, and classical that you learn about in this documentary will maybe surprise a few people. But Chuck, let me ask you this. Endorsing political candidates has become such a polarizing issue these days, and everybody sort of has to walk this fine line and, worry about what their fans are going to say if they come out and openly support someone. But back then, do you think that the support of the Allman Brothers helped President Carter when he was running?
Well, I do. I think it helped with our audience, with young people at the time. I think it gave the president an air of coolness. Who is this guy that's hanging out with these rock and rollers, and seems to be very comfortable in doing so, and seems to genuinely like not only the music, but the people involved in making the music. And, the president has always been very loyal to all of his friends. When you talk about Gregory Allman, and we all miss him so much, but, Greg went through a very tough time not long after the president was elected. And the president never, disowned him, or never, with any of the controversial things that were going on at the time. He always remained a true friend to Greg. And then, of course, as you know, many years later, Gregory was given a honorary master's degree at the Mercer University, and I think the president was involved in that presentation. And so they remained friends all the way through Gregory's end.
I love the clip in the documentary where Greg Allman talks about drinking a fifth of whiskey with Carter, and then they cut to Carter saying, "I don't think it was a fifth. I think it was more like a little bit of a glass." You can see how that might be. Yeah, sure, it might have been a fifth
for Greg.
Right. Exactly. Well, in a minute we're going to see some of the slides of your memories with President Carter. But before we do that, is there one interaction with him and the Allmans and you that really stands out in your memory?
Well, there's a clip I think you played at the beginning of backstage before the Allman Brothers, one of the Allman Brothers concerts, where we were just jamming, and the president was in there listening to us, and you could tell that he was genuinely engaged. He really enjoyed it and enjoyed being a part of it. Those are very, very special memories. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about this, but I did have the privilege of attending the White House Jazz Festival, and it was an amazing day, just phenomenal. And the feeling that everyone had, all the musicians, all of the politicians that were there, everybody kind of threw any of the controversial or issues of disagreement away, and it was just a fabulously fun day, and the music was just absolutely incredible.
That footage is pretty extraordinary when you see it in the documentary too. Yeah, and we are going to talk a little bit more about that too. You also, Chuck, say in the documentary that you were very impressed that after President Carter lost his bid for a second term, that he could have gone to Atlanta, but instead he decided to go back to Plains. And you really felt like that spoke to who he was as a person. And I mean, why do you think that going home to Plains was so important to him?
Roots, that's where he's from. When you read the books and he talks about his relationship with his father and the relationship with Plains, Georgia, growing up, the relationship with his church, I think all of those things were like a magnet pulling the iron closer. And I think he was very comfortable in going home. And as we know, I think it's just been brilliant to watch his efforts ever since he's been out of the presidency. I mean, the humanitarian causes and Habitat for Humanity and eradicating guinea worm and all of these incredible things that he's accomplished in his lifetime.
Yes, and it's great to hear from Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood in the documentary about Habitat for Humanity, because they certainly have worked closely with him over the years on that. Yeah. Well, Chuck, thank you for that. We are going to see some slides now from your memories with President Carter, so maybe you could take us through these.
Okay, sure. Well, there you go. Okay, that's Dickie Betts, and I believe that's Don. Oh my heavens, what's the actor's name of Miami Vice?
Don Johnson. Don Johnson, yeah.
Don had befriended Dickie at the time, and I think Don had been doing a movie in around the Forsyth, Georgia area at that time, so he was hanging out with us. And there we are sharing a laugh. I wish I could remember exactly what we were laughing about, but we were obviously very happy. So it was a good moment.
Chuck, I always joke that you have the coolest hair in rock and roll. And I mean, is this your whole life? It's been like that.
I don't know about that. But hey, that look, I'll just say this. It was the 70s. That's my excuse. And I'm sticking.
There you go. All right.
Oh, yeah. This was a spur of the moment, unexpected meeting at a Atlanta Falcons football game. I had garnered a sideline pass through a friend of mine, and unbeknownst to me and my wife, Rose Lane, who of course is in that picture, the president was attending, and he was giving the pregame sermon, not sermon, but prayer for the players. And wow, it was, I think you can see the joy on all of our faces just to be reunited unexpectedly like that. And brilliant.
That's a nice picture. Yeah.
Very special. This was Mrs. Carter being involved in an event in Macon, Georgia. And my wife, Rose Lane, and I went to it, and the president attended. And my book, Growing a Better America, had just come out. And I didn't really know if the president was going to be there for sure, but of course he was. And so I couldn't help but ask him if he would engage in a picture. And he, of course, did a foreword to that book, and meant a lot to me that he would take the time and effort to do so.
Well, you certainly have the common cause of the environment to share with each other too.
Absolutely. You know, he, boy, oh boy, if he was president now, things would be a lot different concerning our environmental issues, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This is at our house at Charlane in Twiggs County, and the president and Mrs. Carter came. We had a wonderful lunch together. I played some music for them before we all got on the buggy and went out into the woods and did a little bit of hunting and just talking about the outdoors and just sharing special time together. Lovely memory for me.
Now, when you play music for the president and his wife, does he ever have a specific request?
You know, I do a version of Georgia on My Mind that, of course, Ray Charles is my big hero forever and ever. And not that I could ever do it as good as Ray, but the president enjoyed my version of it, and I'm very grateful for that.
Cool. What do we have coming up next? That's it. That's it for the slides. All right. Well, thank you, Chuck. If you could stick around for a few minutes till we get to that audience Q&A, because Now we are going to move over to my colleague, Ernie Suggs. I'm so happy I get to say hello to Ernie. He's the enterprise reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And we're also welcoming Jamal Ahmad, radio anchor at Atlanta's jazz station, WCLK. Welcome to both of you guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Hi, Jamal, too. Well, Ernie, we're going to start with you. You have interviewed President Carter before,
Yes.
and can you speak a little bit about his love of music? Because I'm kind of jealous that you've gotten to talk to him about music, and I haven't yet.
Well, you talk to a lot of people about music that I'm very jealous of as well. So we can.
Fair point.
But I think one of the things about President Carter and music is that, you know, we mentioned that in a couple of weeks he's going to be 96 years old, and you know, when we look at President Carter now, we see a person who was the president of the United States with the gray hair, and he's this senior statesman. But when we really think about it, and we really think about a president, as according to the documentary, who brought rock and roll and who brought music to the White House, Jimmy Carter was the perfect person. He was the logical person to do that. I mean, he was 32 years old when Elvis first appeared on Ed Sullivan. He was 41 years old when Dylan went electric at Newport. He was 52 years old when he became president of the United States. So I'm about 52 years old. So I think about the kind of music that I like now that's logical. It's a natural progression that Jimmy Carter, coming out of Ford and really coming out of the Nixon era, succeeding that, which was that staid kind of conservative era of music and life, and how how people wore their hair and wore their dressed. And you look at the documentary as to how casual President Carter was and how casually he dressed and who he hung out with. He was the natural person to be the rock and roll president. So when I look at the documentary, when I talk to him, when I read about his life, you know, I am not surprised. I'm a bit surprised that we are surprised as to who he is in terms of who he is as a musician, or who he is as a person who loves music. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just watching, you know, even, you know, a lot of people talked about the jazz stuff, but I was really impressed also with the gospel and how, you know, he came out of the church and how, you know, he was into Black music and into Black gospel music, and how Andy said, you know, he would take him to church and Jimmy Carter would know the songs better than Andy Young would know the songs. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a person who kind of really kind of grew up in it, who really enjoyed it, and who really, it's not something. And one more thing, and I'll let Jamal jump in. One more thing, when you talked about Jerry Brown in the documentary, about how Jerry Brown was bringing in Linda Ronstadt and the Eagles and all these really high-powered musicians, it seemed a bit, and I don't think they touched on it heavily, but it seemed a bit staged. It didn't seem natural that Jerry Brown was bringing in these type of people. But, and Chuck can agree with me on this, with Jimmy Carter, it was natural. It was natural to have discussions with Dizzy Gillespie and Willie Nelson and Dolly Parton about music, because this is the stuff that he was into and these were his friends, and it became a natural kind of transition. So Jimmy Carter, I think everything about him and music is always legitimate, it's always natural, and it's always organic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, when Chris and I spoke a few weeks ago, he had mentioned, you know, how everybody thinks that Bill Clinton was the first rock and roll president. And then, of course, the Obamas certainly brought music into the White House on a regular basis. But really, you know, it was President Carter with all these various interests. And that jazz festival in 1978, I mean, it was the first time that an event like that was held at the White House. And Jamal, you could talk to us about this. I mean, it was kind of in tribute to the Newport Jazz Festival. And I think one of the most delightful pieces of the entire documentary is when Jimmy Carter gets on stage and sings Salt Peanuts with Dizzy Gillespie and Max Roach up there. And it's just such an incredible scene. And he looks so uncomfortable, but yet so happy at the same time to be doing it, which is just so endearing about it. But can you talk to us a little bit about, you know, with these slides, just how incredible this gathering was, Jamal?
Well, it was a really special moment. It wasn't the first moment that the White House saw. I mean, back in April of 1969, I think, President Nixon actually okayed a tribute to Duke Ellington, his 70th birthday celebration, and actually presented Duke Ellington with the father was a butler at the White House. So for him to get the highest award as a civilian was truly amazing. But this particular night, or day, shall we say, was really important, not only for for the White House, but for all these musicians, and especially for George Wein. George Wein, of course, the legendary producer of the Newport Jazz Festival that started back in 1954, something like that. I think that's somewhere 54. Had seen so many changes. As Ernie said, you saw Dylan go electric during the Newport Jazz Festival. You saw a lot of things happen during the Newport Jazz Festival. So for him to celebrate 25 years was very monumental. But then you look at the lineup, and I think what the lineup showed was how brilliant of an organizer George Wein was. The fact that he started the day off with the legendary U.B. Blake, who at that time I think was 95 years young, and U.B. Blake wrote some of the most seminal tunes post. I won't say post. Well, really post ragtime. Post ragtime, pre-jazz. He really set the stage for a lot of jazz musicians. For him to open up that day was extremely, extremely monumental and symbolic. But you look at some of the other folk that were invited, and you have some of these folk on the screen. Gil Evans, Chick Corea, Benny Carter, Clark Terry. And what he does essentially during that day is he groups everyone in these different super groups, almost ensembles. But the surprise to me of that day was Jimmy Carter's response to Cecil Taylor.
Yeah.
And anyone knows Cecil Taylor. Cecil Taylor is one of the most, he really is the prototypical avant-garde jazz musician. I mean, you can't get any more out than Cecil Taylor. And Cecil Taylor does this solo kind of 5-minute thing that really impresses Jimmy Carter so much. He runs up to him, grabs both of his hands, and says, "I've never seen anyone play the piano like that." So that really was amazing. I think also a really beautiful moment was, and I think this has to be talked about. Oh, you just brought up the picture.
Yeah.
A beautiful moment was this picture right here of Jimmy Carter putting his hand around Charles Mingus, the legendary Charles Mingus, who at the time was extremely ill. He had just had a stroke. He was also suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease. So when Jimmy Carter put his hand on his back like that, he just broke down in tears. And as you can see, the entire audience stood up and gave him a standing ovation. And it was a beautiful moment. I think it was also a moment of reconciliation because Charles Mingus and George Wein had been at odds for a few years. Matter of fact, Charles Mingus and Max Roach had created an anti-Newport Jazz Festival back in 1963. So it was a bit of a coming back for everyone.
Chuck, were you there at the? I know Sea Level played at the inaugural ball, but were you also part of the Jazz Fest?
Yes, I was very privileged to be there and to hear that story about Cecil Taylor. I will never forget that moment. It was so incredible because, as Jamal said, you don't get out any further out than Cecil Taylor. He's atonal. You're not going to be humming his melodies, but his technique and his ability, his talent is just off the charts great. And so many people don't understand that kind of music. But when President Carter jumped up as he did and ran up there to Taylor, that was a moment. That was a very, very special moment.
And I think one more thing before if I can jump in very quickly. Sure. When you talk about music and when you talk about the era, you talk about President Carter's bravery and as a politician and as President of the United States, befriending these people. You talk about Greg Allman and his troubles, the drug troubles that he had. Willie Nelson, who was arrested and I think it was in Jamaica when he was, in jail, and he got out of jail and he came straight to the White House. And, in an era now where you have so much cancel culture, where, politicians can't be involved in certain people because of who they are, I think it took a lot of bravery for President Carter to say, these are my friends. And, they may have troubles, they may be doing things, they may be smoking marijuana in the White House with my son, but, they're still my friend. And I'm still going to stand by them. So I think that right there in the 1970s, as opposed to what's going on now in 2020, is very striking and it says a lot about President Carter as a person.
That loyalty Chuck was talking about.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Do we have another slide to go to, or is that it for slides? We're wrapped up with slides?
That's it.
Okay, we're good with slides. All right. Well, Jamal, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Ernie, as well. We are going to take some audience questions now because we know you guys are out there and that you have them. So thanks to the panelists for sticking around for this now. Hang on, and here we go.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Melissa. We do have some questions from the audience, and I will start with one about Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan doesn't generally agree to being interviewed. How did you manage to get on his radar and his schedule? And talk about the experience of being with Bob Dylan and getting him to participate. I guess this one goes to Mary.
Well, yeah, I can sort of speak to this. So we have a wonderful writer on this project, Mr. Bill Flanagan, who is a very widely renowned music writer. He used to be the editor of Musician Magazine back in the day. He's on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's just a really knowledgeable and widely published music writer. And he was the one who secured us the interview with Bob Dylan through his previous relationships with Dylan and his manager. And but even just getting him to say yes was that alone. I from what I understand, Bill wrote a very compelling letter asking for him to participate, and he agreed to do it. But just getting him logistically was very challenging because he was on tour at the time. And they had got the message to us that he would try to do it at some point in this particular month, in the month of December. And we looked at his tour schedule, and he was everywhere from Texas to Connecticut to Florida and all points in between over the course of that month. Like when he was going out on tour, he was hitting like all of these cities across America. So we had no idea where or when it would take place. And we just had to kind of be ready to jump on a moment's notice. And we were very lucky that he had a day off in Connecticut, which was only a couple hours drive from where I'm based in New York City. And so I loaded up, a couple of station wagons full of the crew and our equipment, and we drove up to a big old house on a snowy day in Connecticut winter. And he was amazing. It was interesting. He came in and was, you wouldn't even recognize him when he walked in the door. Like he kind of looked like a hobo in a hooded coat and gloves, and he just sort of like came in and we showed him to where we were going to be shooting and where he could sort of his little area where he could get ready, and he came out in his like Bob Dylan hat and his guy liner, and it was like he transformed into the Bob Dylan character. It was there was a very different vibe when he was in those other clothes, and I get that. I understand why that is, that like he was becoming his stage persona in a way, and he had brought some thoughts about what he wanted to say, and Bill was really great at kind of guiding him through this process. Bill did most of the interviews for the film for us because he's such a great interviewer, and but Bob definitely, like, there's a bit at the end of the film where he kind of talks about, how there's so many different ways you could describe Jimmy Carter, and he lists off, all of these different aspects of Carter's personality, and the way that he said it, he really worked on like the rhythm of it a little bit. And it was, to me, it sounded like he had written a song about Jimmy Carter, or a poem at least. I mean, it was very rhythmic in the way that he delivered it, and he wanted to make sure that he got the rhythm of the words right. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, you know?
It was definitely one of my favorite parts of the film, is seeing Bob Dylan as part of it, just because you can hear about people having friendships, especially if they started decades ago, but to see him recently, it was pretty incredible. Okay, we have a couple questions coming in about, have the Carters seen the film? And if they did, tell me about how you showed it to them and what were their thoughts.
They have seen the film, and Chris and I were lucky enough to go down to Plains back in January, right before the pandemic happened, and show the finished film to the Carter family. We went to the Plains High School, which is now a National Historic Site, and they have the classic old auditorium there with the seats that we actually showed a little bit of it in our film because it was so beautiful. We shot some footage there, and we sat and showed the film to them, and President Carter was amazing. He sat like right in the middle of the front row, and I usually like to sit like off to the side and kind of in behind people when they're watching, because it's nerve-wracking to sit there and watch someone watch your work. It's uncomfortable, but I like to be able to watch them, to see their reaction, but I don't want them to feel like I'm you know, it's just weird if I'm like stalking them or whatever. But President Carter said, "Mary, come sit by me in case I have any questions." And I was like, okay. And he would just have these little like asides in the middle of the movie, and just, you know, comment on things. And it was such a special experience for me to sort of sit at the knee of the master and have him, you know, just sort of toss off these little things. Like he said, when John Wayne walks out onto the stage in the inaugural concert footage, he turns to me and he's like, "You know, I was the last person to visit John Wayne before he died." It's just like, I had no idea. That's amazing. So yeah, that was a great afternoon, and we were so privileged to not only to be able to share the movie with him, which I know was really important for Chris had made a promise to the president that he would show him this movie before he died, and you know, that was a something that was kind of always a huge goal for us, to get this done and get it to a point where he could see it, and then to have his sort of stamp of approval. He said to Amy afterwards, to Amy Carter, his daughter, that he thought it was terrific and that he wouldn't change a thing. And she texted that message to us. So that was pretty big honor, I gotta say. Pretty high praise coming from the president.
We touched a little bit, and this may be one of our final questions, but we touched a little bit on the, you know, this coming out during the pandemic and where people are with just as music consumers right now, with everybody watching their favorite artists on Zooms or, you know, on Instagram Live and that kind of thing. But how interesting it is that it is coming out, and it is someone, as Ernie had said, you know, not only a former president, but someone who was, you know, already a mature adult, not a teenager, in other words, when he first met Bob Dylan and those things. But how do you think the film overall, I mean, especially coming out now, it really does, to me, tell a story about just the importance of music in all of our lives. And I think, you know, we saw it in the trailer that President Carter said, you know, it's something that brings people together. And at a time when we're not only in a pandemic, but in extreme division politically, this film seems to have that message very strongly, that music is something that brings people together, that is something sort of pure for people to gather around.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that was one of our goals all along, is this is a love letter to the power of music. And I think that there's nothing stronger in the world. I think that, there's a reason that, music is one of the very first art forms that humans created. From the dawn of humanity, we have made music. We have found a way to make music. And I think it's something that is deep and elemental inside all of us. And one of the things that I think music is so great at is it reminds us that we all have a lot more in common than we are different. And we all can love the same songs, and we all want to hold hands and dance together and sing together at the top of our lungs. And, we can all get behind a good beat, And I think that, that one thing about what we're going through right now in America that has been so upsetting is that we can't do all those things together right now. But I think that, it's important to be reminded that, American music and rock and roll and jazz are two of the, primary forms of like the greatest of American culture, the greatest culture that we have created as a country. And the fact that, Jimmy Carter celebrated both of those forms in with such enthusiasm, I think that these are the things that can bring us together. I remain full of hope that President Carter is absolutely right when he says that, even after a divisive era of our, changing history, that music can bring us together. I believe that with all my heart. And I hope that, the music in this film is certainly a little bit of ear candy and eye candy, with all these great performances and great performers and amazing, our soundtrack is fire, and I'm proud of everything that's on this soundtrack. And I think that it can bring people together and at least like give people a moment of joy and hopefulness. And at least that's my goal. So.
Thank you. That sounds like a great place to wrap it up. So thanks everyone. Thanks for our audience today for attending this webinar. And you will all have a chance to see Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, soon, as Melissa said. I think tomorrow is when it opens in Atlanta. And also, I just want to say thanks also to the Carter Center and the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library for helping us promote this event and get the word out to people about the film. And we're so happy today that we've had Melissa Ruggieri from the AJC to moderate. And of course, our guests, including Director Mary Wharton, producer Chris Farrell, Chuck Lavelle, musician extraordinaire, Ernie Suggs, and Jamal Ahmad, local journalists on AJC and WCLK. Thank you all for your time and input. This will be available on YouTube after, and we thank you for joining us. Please visit atlantapressclub.org for future events or to donate to the club. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, panelists, if you want to stay on just a moment while we clear the room, we will be able to have a little post chat if anybody's interested. Just give us a couple seconds.
Clear the room.
Yeah. Well, the attendees are still watching us, so as they leave, we will convert over here. We'll just